It's being organised. Honourable members, if we can turn our attention now to Part 4. The debate is on clauses 49 to 51. The question is that Part 4 stand part. I call the Honourable Leanne Dalzell. Will you need a microphone?
Mr. Chairman.
The Honourable Leanne Dalzell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I've been addressing the different parts of this legislation in light of the nature of this particular bill that we have in front of us today, which is an omnibus bill. And the omnibus bill that we have in front of us today was designed specifically so parts like this could actually see the light of day. So what we're dealing with in Part 4 is an amendment to the Conservation Act 1987. Now, there is no way that the Minister of Conservation, and I'm not sure who the Minister of Conservation was last year when this bill was introduced, because was it Kate Wilkinson then or was it someone else? But anyway, whichever minister it was who was the Minister of Conservation last year would never have been able to persuade the Leader of the House to place an amendment of this nature in front of the legislative program of the government ahead of a number of the other measures that they were pursuing. And it was only by grouping a number of amendments to legislation in an omnibus bill, which actually, you know, I take some credit for as a former Minister of Commerce. I've got it on. It is working, yes. A former Minister of Commerce, and I realised that there were a number of pieces of legislation that needed to be adjusted, but which of themselves weren't sufficient to gain a place on the legislative program. And having been a minister bidding for a place on a legislative program, I know personally how difficult it can be. So the idea, I was a very good bidder, but I wasn't always successful. And so therefore I felt that it was important to have a vehicle which enabled a number of ministers to basically put these kinds of measures together in an overarching bill and to bring them before the House. Now, they were never a low enough level to qualify for the Statutes Amendment Bill because, of course, they have to be non-controversial and they also have to have, essentially, the consent of the whole House, because you cannot have individual parties basically saying, no, we're not going to agree to that particular measure. We don't want this change to the Conservation Act going through the Statutes Amendment Bill process, and so therefore we won't have it in there. And of course, if that was the kiss of death, that was the end of it. And Statutes Amendments Bills enable those little tidy-up functions to be taken up on a regular and ongoing basis. Now, with this particular amendment to the Conservation Act 1987, it would never have made the cut for a Statutes Amendment Bill because it actually had some elements of controversy around it. No controversy, actually. And I suspect that the Green Party is going to take a call on this particular part because I know that there was concern that they raised on this particular measure when it was brought before the committee. And in fact, I know that some environmental movement individuals did make some submissions to the Select Committee. And, you know, it's always difficult to know after having heard the evidence whether people felt satisfied with the amendments that we made in the Select Committee. And, of course, the people here in Parliament will have the bill in front of them and will see that we actually didn't make any amendments to this particular part. So it'd be very interesting to see whether people ultimately were satisfied with the changes. Well, we did make a slight amendment in order to meet one of the concerns that had been raised. But essentially, it increases the time around concessions applying in the dock estate, and I think that that was an issue that was an issue of substance, and it was an issue that did require some sort of well, it certainly did require a degree of reporting on it. Now, one of the issues that I think hasn't been really dealt with in this debate thus far is the fact that there were a number of officials that appeared in front of the Select Committee every time we were dealing with this particular bill. And so they came from all the different departments, Mr Chairman.
I call the Honourable Member Leanne Dalzell.
Mr Chairman, that they came from all the different departments in order to respond to all of the issues. So when you look at the whole bill, we had people coming from the Department of Conservation, we had people from MED, we had people from Internal Affairs, we had people from Agriculture and Fisheries, we had fortunately, a lot of people were covered by the by MED. We had statistics as well, and we had justice officials. And the problem that I had, certainly as the kind of minister that had spearheaded the process, and then as the chair of the Select Committee, was feeling a sense of frustration that all of these officials felt that they had to turn up for every discussion that we had on every part of every bill. And so what I was trying to do was to get the different departments to maybe collaborate with each other in order to reduce the amount of input into the Select Committee, which was the whole point of having an omnibus bill. Well, you know, I mean, I did feel a sense of frustration. I think my colleagues are sensing how frustrated that I felt. That one of the purposes of the bill was to cut down some of that interdepartmental nonsense and actually just allow some of the different departments actually to come together and have other departments represent their interests on these particular matters. But the Conservation Amendment Act amendment is that probably did require the input of the department, and so I wouldn't include that in my general comments. So on that note, I think that's sufficient on part 4.
I recognise the Honourable Member Eugenie Sage.